All right, well, good evening, everyone. We have people logging on, so we're going to give it another moment or two to allow folks to log on and get settled. So good evening, everyone. As you are logging on, we're going to give it a few moments. So if you want to take a second to grab yourself a water or a tea or anything like that, that's fine. We'll just give it another few moments for people to get logged on and settled in. All right, so good evening, everyone. And again, apologies if you've heard me say this before, but we're just giving some time for everyone to log on, and we'll give it another few moments before we begin tonight's program. All right. Well, I think we'll get started. I've got an eye on the time. We may have some other folks join us, but let's, and I'm sorry, I'm just having technical issues for one moment. Okay, so I think we will get started. So welcome and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Healthy Holiday Recipes and the latest in Alzheimer's and Dementia Research Program. You might not think those two topics go together, recipes and research, but there is some nice synergy there. And we'll be starting the program by talking about the latest in Alzheimer's and dementia research. And one of the areas we'll be exploring is the growing evidence around lifestyle interventions. And one of the lifestyle choices, of course, includes nutrition. But after the presentation, we'll be handing, and I'm sorry, my dog in the background is making noises. We'll be handing the program over to our featured speaker after we talk about research. And our speaker tonight will talk about some nutritional choices we can make at this time of year. And she'll be doing a demonstration for us as well. So it should be a fun program. So my name is Susan Ankoviak. I am the Vice President of Programs and Services at the Alzheimer's Association in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire chapter. And in my role, I work with a highly skilled team who provide education, support groups, and consultation services where we can work with families to develop a plan to meet their specific needs. We have a wide range of programs and offerings for our services, for our families, and all of our services come at no cost to families. If you'd like to learn more about the support and the expertise that we provide, you can go to our website at alz.org, or you can call our helpline at 800-272-3900, and I'll be showing you that number again at the end of my presentation. But tonight, I come to you in my role as a research champion. And in this role, I serve as an ambassador to the Alzheimer's research mission. And as I share my screen, you'll see that I'm going to share an overview with you of the latest in research. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now, I hope. Just give me one more moment. Okay, so the Alzheimer's Association is truly driven to enhance care and support for people living with Alzheimer's disease. And you'll see by our logo here that it really represents our multifaceted approach to serve people living with dementia. So the left side of this logo is representative of people and the fact that we provide education, support, and guidance for families and people who care for them. And those services that we deliver are rooted in the most up-to-date research in the field. Now, the right side of the logo, you may or may not be able to see my cursor, but the right side of the logo represents our role in science and research. And we're recognized by the global scientific community for our unwavering focus of participating in and funding the best science around the world. So I'm excited to talk with you about more about that tonight. Excuse me. So as we take a look at some of the data, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, and you can read a lot of this for yourselves, but a couple of important things to point out is that we know there is a heavy burden on Alzheimer's disease and dementia on individuals and family and society, and it continues to grow. More than 6 million Americans over the age of 65 are living with Alzheimer's today, and that number is expected to more than double by the year 2050. We also know that the disease places a very heavy burden on the healthcare system with total payments for care in the amount of $335 billion. And that is projected to rise to more than $1 trillion by 2050. I don't even know how we can get our head around what $1 trillion means, honestly. And we also know that discrimination was found to be a barrier to Alzheimer's and dementia care. Half of Black Americans and about 1/3 of Asian Americans and Hispanic Americans report that they have experienced discrimination when seeking health care. So some of these data points that I point out to you tonight illustrate the growing burden on people living with dementia and their families. So I'd like to take a moment, though, to talk a little bit about the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia. And I know that some of you do know these differences, but understandably, there is still a lot of confusion. Often those terms are used interchangeably. Now, the term dementia really refers to a syndrome or a collection of symptoms. And typically, the kinds of symptoms that we're talking about include memory loss. That's the one that we all know about. But also, we can see changes in judgment, difficulty with completing familiar tasks. We can see difficulty with language, changes in thinking and decision-making, but also sometimes we may see what we think of as behavioral changes or psychological symptoms. So we may see things like agitation or sleep disturbances. We can see depression and anxiety, and sometimes we can even possibly recognize hallucinations or delusional thinking for someone going through this issue. So dementia is referring to a combination of those symptoms, and the severity of which is significant enough that it really interrupts the person's ability to function in the way that they normally would. Now, someone with dementia, therefore, may really have difficulty then performing their usual day-to-day responsibilities, such as working in their job or perhaps reliably taking medications or managing their finances. Over time, things become more challenging, and we can see people having difficulty with basic needs, such as getting dressed or managing their personal care. So the question becomes, well, what is causing these symptoms? Why is this happening? Well, Alzheimer's is a disease, or it is a biological cause of the dementia symptoms. Now, there are many causes of dementia, but Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of dementia. And most people who have dementia have it because they have Alzheimer's disease in their brain. Now, there are other biological causes of dementia as well. There is vascular dementia or vascular problems, such as a series of small blood clots or a series of small strokes or blood clot on the brain. And those things can interrupt with the body's ability to really transport blood and oxygen to the body and to the brain. We can also see Lewy body diseases, and these include things like Parkinson's disease, dementia, or Lewy body disease. We also see frontal temporal dementia, and these things also cause the symptoms that we've talked about. So there are other less common causes as well, but these are the big four. So Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, and frontal temporal dementia are all brain diseases that cause the symptoms that we're talking about. And often there can be a combination of these different types of dementia. We call that mixed dementia. So the Alzheimer's Association, it's very important to note, provides care and support and does research into all causes of dementia. So we're not just about Alzheimer's. If you or anyone that you care about has dementia, or you have any concerns about brain health at all, we're here to help you and would welcome you to reach out to us. So a couple of other important things to note. First of all, Alzheimer's disease is a continuum. It is a progressive process, and it begins with biological changes in the brain, but it takes a long time for the cognitive symptoms to develop. So at the beginning, we know that there are biological changes, but it's considered asymptomatic. We're not seeing the outward symptoms that I was talking about earlier at the beginning. But eventually, those cognitive issues and challenges do begin to develop, and we refer to that as mild cognitive impairment, otherwise known as MCI. But then, as symptoms begin to impact the person on a daily basis, we identify this now as dementia, and it progresses and unfortunately worsens over time and evolves into the moderate and severe stage as well. Now, it's important to note that almost everyone, as they age, has changes in the brain. For all of us, it becomes harder to remember names. You might remember, or I'm sorry, you may forget where you parked your car in the parking lot, or you might walk into a room and forget what you went in there for. These changes are normal, and they do not indicate that the person is on the way to Alzheimer's or dementia. So it's important to note that Alzheimer's disease is different. It is not typical aging. And although we don't fully understand the causes, research is getting closer to that question. So that being said, we do know a lot about risk factors, and some of these risk factors are things that unfortunately we can't control. They're considered non-modifiable. So you see things here on the screen, such as age, genetics, the genes that you inherit from your parents, race and ethnicity. These are things that we do not control. But sometimes there are modifiable risk factors, and these are things that we can control and influence, such as our cardiovascular health, education, our diet, exercise, sleep. These are all risk factors that we have some degree of control over. So that's an overview for you, but I will say it's an exciting time in research. The Alzheimer's Association is the world's largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's research. And as a matter of fact, we have played a vital role in every significant development in Alzheimer's research. We convene the Alzheimer's Association International Conference annually, and this is the largest annual event of its kind that advances dementia science all across the globe. And what's exciting to think about is because of the leadership of the Alzheimer's Association and this worldwide effort, at any given moment, somewhere around the world, someone is working to end Alzheimer's. So it's kind of an exciting time when you think of it in that regard. Now, today, the association has more than $310 million of grants in action, making possible more than 950 projects in 48 different countries. And we advocate. So we have increased federal funding for Alzheimer's disease and dementia research at the National Institutes of Health. Our advocacy recently helped secure $3.2 billion annually for funding for Alzheimer's research. So it's incredibly exciting work. But switching gears a little bit, I just want to talk about where we stand today with FDA approved therapies. So currently, the FDA has approved 6 therapies or medications around the world of Alzheimer's and dementia. And as you take a look at this kind of grayed box here, these 5 listed are acetylcholinesterase, that's difficult to pronounce tonight, inhibitors. So what that clunky word means is that these medications are designed to help the brain cells communicate with one another more effectively for a longer period of time. These medications do not affect the biology of the brain. They address the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So unfortunately, they do not slow down, modify, or reverse the disease process. They do address the symptoms. And unfortunately, then they don't also have the ability to protect cellular health. And therefore, ultimately, we do see the decline and the destruction of brain cells over time. But a lot of research now is focused on cellular health and is aimed at the biology of the disease process. So recently in 2021, the first approved drug addressing the biology of Alzheimer's disease has developed, and it's called Aduhelm, otherwise known as aducanumab. And aducanumab is one of many drugs of its kind that is now in a class of medications that is finally addressing the biology of Alzheimer's disease. And it is targeting the buildup of a protein in the brain called beta amyloid and really kind of breaks down that beta amyloid. So it's an exciting advancement that we've had. But in terms of other treatment options that we see, there are over 140 unique therapies today that are being tested in clinical trials, and they all address different things. So you can see that some of these advancements are addressing beta amyloid, which builds up in the brain, but there are also some medications that are taking a look at the tau protein that builds up in the brain, or neuroinflammation, the vascular stress that happens. So all different avenues to address the biology that's happening. Now, you may have heard most recently in the news about a new medication called lecanemab. And lecanemab is a monoclonal antibody that's designed to target and reduce amyloid in the brain that is creating plaque associated with Alzheimer's disease. So phase 3 results have showed a 27% slower rate of decline in memory and thinking among the recipients in the study. These were individuals with early Alzheimer's disease. And the FDA is expected to decide whether lecanemab will be granted accelerated approval in January. So in early January, we will learn more about that process. in the meantime, the Alzheimer's Association is urging the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to modify their benefits coverage to enable greater access to this treatment if indeed it is approved by the FDA. But as I'm winding down now in my comments, we're going to shift a little bit to talk about lifestyle interventions, because research suggests that combining multiple healthy factors may actually be the most impactful strategy for delaying the onset of mild cognitive impairment and dementia. And some of the strongest research today indicates that controlling cardiovascular risk factors may help in delaying cognitive decline. So when we think about these risk factors, we're talking about physical activity, nutrition, cognitive and social stimulation. So a combination of those lifestyle interventions will likely be the way that we will see advancements in treating Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. And it is very important to note that there are unfortunately disparities in Alzheimer's disease prevalence and in research. Recent research has showed, for example, that older Black Americans are twice as likely as compared to older white Americans to develop Alzheimer's disease. And we know that Hispanic Americans are 1.5 times as likely as compared to whites to have Alzheimer's or other dementia. We also know that historically, ethno-racial groups have been underrepresented in clinical trials. So it is really critical that we work together to engage all people in clinical trials. We need to understand what drives dementia in everyone. And we have a very diverse population in the United States, so we're quite eager to make changes and to evolve in that way. So the science is moving fast, and it's an exciting time again to kind of watch all of this happen. So I'll just wrap up my comments to say that we have a couple of resources for you to keep on top of research. I'll call to your attention, alz.org is our website, but if you go to alz.org/science hub, it enables you to learn about an app that you can download right on your phone. That's my personal way to keep on top of research updates. You also can call our helpline, 800-272-3900, to learn as much as you can about research. And that's also where we can work with families. If you have any needs at all, please do call our helpline. And again, all of our services come at no cost to families. So wrapping up my comments, there is hope in research. The way that we will be able to end Alzheimer's disease is through research, and we are eager to welcome you to learn more about that. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and now I am very excited to introduce you to our featured presenter tonight, Siddhi Sheth. Siddhi is a registered dietitian and is currently the in-store dietitian at the Singeri ShopRite of Shelton, Connecticut. Siddhi earned her master's degree in dietitian administration at the University of Kentucky, where she also completed her dietetic internship training and bachelor's in psychology. Siddhi is passionate about working in the field of nutrition, and she has a strong interest in public health and wellness promotion, so you can see why we enjoy working together. At ShopRite, she provides free nutrition services to customers and the community, including individual and family nutrition consultations, guided store tours, and virtual group nutrition classes and support groups, meal prep activities, recipe makeovers, etc. So you can schedule a free consultation, by the way, or sign up for upcoming events at dietitians.shoprite.com. So we are very excited to have Siddhi join us tonight and to give us some ideas and provide a demonstration. So Siddhi, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, Susan. I enjoyed learning all about the current research that you were speaking of. And I'm really glad that we're talking about the lifestyle factors today, because that's where I come in. I'm going to talk a lot about that nutrition aspect of things. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my slides, and we can start talking more about the nutrition side of things. So we're leading up into the holidays, and eating the healthy diet is not necessarily too much on everyone's mind, but I always say that there's opportunities to add more nutrition into whatever we're doing. So I just wanted to talk today about celebrating holidays mindfully. So you're going to see that buzzword mind come up a lot. Right. So Susan spoke to this a minute ago about all the services we offer at ShopRite. I'm based again out of the ShopRite of Shelton, and we offer counseling, a lot of virtual classes and sessions like the one today. And then this is the website if you're interested in learning more about what events we have available, or if you're interested to book an appointment. Okay, so I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction and background. I know Susan may have touched a little bit on some of these aspects, but just to give you a little bit of background, in the US, more than 6 million Americans of all ages have Alzheimer's. And this may be information that you're familiar with as well, but just wanted to refresh. The most recent statistic says that there's an estimated 6.5 million Americans who are age 65 plus and are living with Alzheimer's. And, Susan also spoke to those beta amyloid plaques that can form in the brain. That can trigger a chain of events in your brain that causes damage to nerve cells and eventually leads to things like dementia and Alzheimer's. And you may be wondering that, okay, if this is affecting older Americans, if you're younger, why would this affect me? Well, research actually shows that cognitive decline can occur in the brain even 20 years before any symptoms present. So, why not start today and incorporate these healthy lifestyle tips? So I wanted to speak more specifically about nutrition that can help in terms of lifestyle nutrition that can help maybe reduce the risk or, prevent cognitive decline. And there's a diet called the MIND diet that has been a very big buzzword in the community. So what exactly is the MIND diet? So the MIND diet, it's an acronym. It stands for the Mediterranean-Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. And it's basically a combination of those Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So both of those diets, they emphasize fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, fatty fish, unsaturated fats, and then lower intakes of dairy and meat. The DASH diet, in addition to that, it emphasizes a low sodium intake, a lot of fiber-rich foods like fruits and veg and whole grains and things like that. And both of those have been shown to help with heart health. I know we were speaking to how managing our heart health is also important, but now that we're learning that it can help with brain health as well. So why the MIND diet? It shows promising results to prevent and treat cognitive decline, like I was mentioning. And studies show that those who followed the MIND diet lowered their risk of Alzheimer's disease by 53%. And I'm going to get more into like what foods are incorporated in the MIND diet and what foods to avoid. But something to keep in mind too is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing thing, because the same research talked about if those individuals that were studied, they followed it part of the time, it still lowered their risk about 35%. So there's benefit to even adding some of these changes into your eating routine. So what are the foods that we want to include as part of the MIND diet? So a lot of the foods that we want to include that are great for our brain health are things like green leafy vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains, berries, beans, and then of course, fish, poultry, heart-healthy fats like olive oil. And then wine is also included, but of course we want to be mindful of that we're having, consuming alcohol in moderate amount. So why these foods? Why are these foods part of the MIND diet? So they're all rich in so many nutrients that can promote brain health, prevent that cognitive decline, but also promote the cognitive function. And some of those nutrients include antioxidants. You'll find those in the berries and all those, you know, rich pigmented fruits and vegetables. You see fiber in all those foods. There's healthy fats in things like nuts and seeds and, you know, like avocados, olive oil, lean proteins. So we're incorporating that fish and the poultry. Those are the lean proteins. And then there's certain vitamins that are present in all these foods. So B vitamins you'll find in whole grains. The omega-3 fats, you may already be familiar with it being in fatty fish like salmon, but it's also found in things like walnuts and chia seeds. And then vitamin D is also known to help with cognitive function as well. So then there are certain foods that we want to limit, and those include things that are like red meat, butter, pastries and sweets, fried food, fast food, full fat cheese. So it's things that we want to be limiting anyways as part of a general healthful diet. And of course, I wanted to emphasize that foods that you should be avoiding or limiting. So of course, we all have different health needs and nutrition needs, but it's also not realistic to completely try to cut out a food for the rest of our life, right? We're all human. So instead of saying, you know, to cut out a food completely, that's why I like to recommend to avoid it or to limit, have it in moderation. And these are those foods that should be had in those amounts. But why are these foods foods that we need to limit? Because they're highly processed, especially those pastry sweets, the fast food, all of those things. All of these can be really high in saturated fat. And then if it's a processed food, trans fat. They're refined carbs that are present, especially in those baked goods. And there's a lot of added sugars as well. So all of these have been known to help, not help, but they go against that cognitive function. So they don't necessarily help. And research shows that these should be avoided or limited. So let's tie this into the holidays. We're coming up into the holidays in the next few weeks. We just passed Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of occasions this time of year. We're enjoying a lot of celebrations and things like that. So how can we incorporate these tips during the holidays? So let's go a little bit further into that. This is a time where there's a lot going on. It can cause a lot of stress and anxiety for a lot of reasons. Especially if you're a caregiver or somebody who is dealing with Alzheimer's, but it can also cause a lot of stress and anxiety for things related to food. We may feel stuck or helpless when it comes to building those healthy habits this time of year, just because there's so much going on, so many celebrations. But it's important to know that we can still have that healthy relationship with food and have a stress-free and healthy holiday and enjoy ourselves at the same time. What you don't need to do during this time is, deprive yourself, eat only boring foods, or then have a treat or have a meal with the side order of guilt and feel guilty or shameful about having those foods. Instead, just practice mindful eating and cooking, and you can come through the holidays enjoying yourself and, leave those negative feelings about your health or food choices behind. So I wanted to recommend some ways that you can incorporate some brain healthy food into the holidays and still include all your favorite dishes. So one recommendation I have is be green. So I mentioned those leafy greens are a great addition, part of the Mind diet. And, those are things like spinach, kale, collard greens, all those different greens. You can incorporate them. Maybe you incorporate them in a salad. You make a nice salad. Maybe you incorporate them in a side. Maybe you make a side with just that, maybe like a cream spinach or something like that. Another thing I say is go nuts. So add a variety of nuts to whether it's a veggie dish or appetizer. It's a really great way to add nutrition, yes, but it's a great way to add texture and versatility to a dish as well. And you may already know that the omega-3s and walnuts are really great for our brain health. But research shows that besides walnuts, just having a variety of nuts as part of our diet is really great to incorporate. So make sure you're incorporating a variety of different nuts and seeds. Make your dishes berry appealing. So we mentioned berries. Berries are very antioxidant rich. And this includes, those blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, all those, but also one of the berries that we see a lot this time of year is cranberries. And cranberries also show benefits to cognitive function, along with, maybe you already know, they help with our renal health and things like that. But incorporate those berries. Maybe you're making a cranberry sauce, maybe limit that sugar a little bit, but incorporate them. Maybe you make them that side and make them the star of a dessert, make them the main ingredient in a dessert or a side, or maybe you even make a salad and add some berries for that contrast and flavor. All right, so on a roll. So when we're talking about our grains, something we can do is just easily swap out those refined grains for whole grains. So maybe you do a whole grain roll. Maybe you incorporate whole grain bread into the stuffing, or maybe you incorporate whole grains into your sides. Maybe you make a salad and you have some whole grains, some barley, some farro, some quinoa. You can do that as well. It's been real. So beans can also be great. They're very hearty. They're loaded with fiber, and you can easily incorporate them maybe in a main dish, like a soup or a stew or something that you serve in that meal. Maybe you make it the star of a dip. So things like hummus, those are great. That's a bean dip, right? And then you can incorporate in a veggie dish like this kind of bean and veggie salad pictured here. And then the last thing too, besides eating well, we want to make sure that we're taking a drink, meaning staying hydrated, drinking a lot of water. This is the time of year where we're also indulging and enjoying that alcoholic drink. So we want to make sure that in addition to that, we're making sure we're staying hydrated and pacing ourselves, because hydration is just as important as well. Okay, so I wanted to share a bunch of holiday tips I had for this time of year. Remember, it's still a celebration, so don't feel like you have to completely cut out your family favorites. If you know there's a dish or a part of the meal that your family looks forward to, then absolutely still make your family favorites. Remember, this is an occasion, and it's not something that happens all the time. Think ahead. So I mentioned with the foods that we want to avoid, maybe you think about limiting something, but you don't avoid it completely. For example, prime ribs. Maybe you make a prime rib that is featured on your holiday table. That doesn't mean that you have to avoid it completely, but since we're limiting our red meat consumption, keep that in mind as you're leading up to the holiday of like, okay, I'm probably gonna have that red meat for this meal, so I'm gonna try to incorporate some more lean proteins this week leading up to that holiday. And I mentioned it's a special occasion, so treat it as one. Don't feel so much guilt. Don't feel shame. Just eat what you wish to eat, enjoy it, and then move on. This is this only happens once or twice, a few times a year, and there's a lot of different aspects that help us enjoy the holidays too. Besides just the eating, of spending time with everybody, meeting up with friends and family. And of course, food is part of it. So remember, this is a special occasion. But at the same time, if we're eating all these foods in this special occasion, what can happen is we think like, oh, I'm going to eat what I want for this holiday meal. And what happens is we end up getting a lot of leftovers or kind of extending that holiday meal. So try not to extend that one occasion into changing your whole routine. So we just want to create that balance. When we are having our holiday meal, I want to encourage you to balance your plate. So we've got this diagram here on the right here. This is the My Plate diagram. So when we're planning our meal throughout the day, sorry about that, my Roomba is going off. So again, back to balancing your plate. So when we're balancing our plate, we want to incorporate all this balance of different food groups. So we want to incorporate, and if you can't see, I want to point out this image here a little bit more. You want half your plate to be fruits and vegetables. So when you're plating your meal, incorporate all those fruits and vegetables in half of your plate. You want the other half of your plate to include whole grains, so a quarter of your plate whole grains, and then a quarter of your plate to include those lean proteins. And then of course there's room for a few servings of dairy as well, and we want to go for like low-fat dairy when possible. So that is how I would say to balance your plate, or to keep in mind as you're choosing your foods and making your plate for the holidays. All right, so I spoke about the Mind diet, and I do want you to plan your meals mindfully with that in mind. But there's also different things you can do in regards to that. So maybe use simple swaps. So instead of cream or like a heavier full fat dairy, maybe you use something like a Greek yogurt. Instead of sour cream in a dish, you use that yogurt. So there's different things you can do for that. Instead of using like crispy fried onions, maybe you add a little bit more texture and swap it out for some nuts, or chop up the nuts, and it'll create a very similar crunchy texture to the dish. Look at your cooking methods. So if there's a way to make your favorite holiday dish and use a healthier cooking method and it still turns out great, why not go for a healthier cooking method? You know, rather than frying or cooking in a lot of fat, maybe you go for like baking, roasting, broiling, all those different, braising, steaming, all those different healthier cooking methods. And then we spoke about the Mind diet, but then there's also the practice of mindful eating. And mindful eating is where you are really just paying attention to what you're eating. Of course, I know we're socializing and things like that during this time as well, but try to minimize distractions. So even if you are socializing, maybe don't socialize near the kitchen or the buffet table where we're eating mindlessly. We're not focusing on what we're eating, how much we're eating of it. Minimize distractions, you know, focus on what you're eating, enjoy and savor each bite. And, you know, research has shown that when you're doing this, it helps with consumption because you're paying attention to your body, and it helps to increase that feeling of meal satisfaction or satiety as well. So with regards to that, if you want to have something, you see something on the menu, go for it, have it, enjoy it. Maybe you watch that portion, or maybe you try something and you don't enjoy it, or you got a piece of pie and you're halfway through with it and you feel satisfied. You know, remember, there's no need to finish it. You can always tell yourself, okay, I'm full, I'm gonna stop here. And I enjoyed that. I'm gonna end my eating this here. Something else that tends to happen during the holiday meals, especially during like Thanksgiving, is we go all day and we think that we're saving all of our hunger, all those calories for that one big meal. But I would recommend not doing that, just because it leads to that overconsumption. It can lead to you know, almost like binge eating, and it can kind of mess with our, like, let's say somebody's diabetic, it can mess with their blood sugar. So you want to keep in mind that it's not advisable to skip the meals. But if you know, like, when your holiday meal is going to be, let's say your holiday meal is more around lunchtime, like, still have a healthy, balanced breakfast. And you can keep that My Plate diagram in mind as well when you're making your meals. But let's say your meal is later on in the day, maybe mid-afternoon, midday, early evening, then have that breakfast, maybe have like a light lunch or snack, and then head into that meal, just so we're not leading to that behavior where we're skipping the meal and then leading to the overconsumption at the holiday meal. Something to keep in mind too, there's usually a big spread. So keep in mind to pass on foods that don't interest you. If there's something on the table that you really don't enjoy or don't like, then just pass. You don't have to include it on your plate. Now I know that, you know, maybe somebody in the family made it and all that. So that I'll leave up to you in terms of not wanting to hurt someone's feelings, but you can politely pass on a food that doesn't interest you or you're not interested in eating, you know? The other thing that I want to encourage is if, you know, I was mentioning that this is the one meal, one occasion, we enjoy it and we move on. One thing that keeps us from moving on is when we have a lot of leftovers, because then we don't want to waste the food, but we also want to keep eating healthy, and that kind of creates that dilemma. So eliminate the dilemma by making a smaller batch of the particular dish, and keep in mind the number of maybe if you're planning the meal, keep in mind the number of people that are coming over, or you know, be mindful of how much, if you're bringing a dish to someone's house, keep in mind of how much you're preparing for. And so that way, making that smaller batch can help to eliminate those leftovers. Watch your portions. So, you know, I mentioned about the pie, like maybe you want to have that pie, you really look forward to that this time of year. By all means, enjoy the pie, but maybe you have a smaller slice and not like a huge slice as part of your meal. And a lot of times with all the spread, we have opportunity to go back for seconds to fill our plate. Something that I want you to do is to just check your appetite, pay attention to your body, your hunger cues before you consider seconds. That's where that mindful eating again can come into play. When you're taking that time to eat, you're giving your body time, you're giving time for your stomach to send the signal to your brain that, okay, I'm feeling full. So when you do that, when you eat mindfully, you pay attention to your body, you can get a sense of, okay, how hungry am I? Do I want to go back for seconds? And then be mindful of when you're going back for seconds, of that hunger and of what you really want to include on your plate. And then to end, I just wanted to say main thing is to be kind to yourself and others. Again, this is one meal, enjoy it. And then, you know, continue on with your day, continue on with the routine afterwards, right? So be kind to yourself and to others. There's a lot that goes into play this time of year, and there's a lot going on. So it's important that we do this, and we can celebrate the holiday without any guilt or shame. So that is all I have in terms of the presentation, but I did want to do a really great cooking demo here too. I wanted to incorporate some of these tips that I had been suggesting and show you what I'm making or what I'm tweaking to incorporate more mind diet ingredients into the dish. So I think we'll take like 1 or 2 minute break. Maybe we can check the chat for questions.
Yeah, Sydney, I just hopped back on and thank you. That was phenomenal. And I was just going to suggest the same thing while you're transitioning. This would be a perfect time if people have any questions to pop them into the chat or Q&A function. So for anybody to feel very welcome to do that at this point, that would be great.
Perfect. So I'm just move the camera and segue to my stove over here, and then I'll get started in just a few short minutes.
That's great. As you're doing that, feel free, go right ahead, and I'll just share. There were a couple of points that really stood out to me that I really appreciated while we're waiting for any questions that might pop in. But I thought the messaging around mindful eating was just so practical and helpful. And I think, you know, we're very mindful about our lifestyles. And I know for myself, sometimes holidays, all of those things go out the window.
Yeah.
I appreciated that mindfulness doesn't necessarily equate to deprivation. So it was really helpful for me to hear your recommendations. And one in particular that I actually wrote down that I thought was great was, you know, when you're socializing, maybe not to be doing that in the kitchen. And I think that's where everybody naturally congregates, but that was such a simple but practical suggestion, because when you are in the kitchen around food, you're just popping things in and not even thinking about that.
Yeah, and you know,
Excellent.
how many times have we been trying to catch up with family or friends and talking to them, and then you have this handful of something, you keep on eating it, and then when it's empty, you replenish, and then you're like, I don't know, we haven't started eating, but I don't know why I feel so full already. So it helps to, you know, maybe if you want to have something that's in that communal area, like grab something, put it on your plate, and then walk away and socialize away from that space. Or you can very easily be like, oh, you know, let's go talk over there. I want to sit down, or I can't hear you in all this commotion. Let's go over here.
It is so simple, but such a helpful suggestion. I love that. I love that. That's going to be my focus this holiday season, is to be aware of that.
I like that you mentioned too that you have one focus, because I know I mentioned a lot of different tips and it can seem really overwhelming, but that's a really great place to start. Is you just start somewhere. You don't have to start and, you know, go cold turkey and incorporate everything, but maybe you focus on one thing at the time. You mentioned you're focusing on, you know, that social aspect. Maybe someone else wants to focus on, okay, I'm going to focus on incorporating more of these berries. I know I need to eat more fruit. So that's going to be my goal. And once you feel like you have a good grasp of that one item you have been working on, then you can move on and build on that, add something else.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. I know for myself, I have been trying to incorporate nuts more in, especially in the morning if I'm in a rush, and rather than just grab cereal that really doesn't do anything. I've discovered the world of nuts, and to have a little protein in the morning as I'm flying out the door, and I don't have the biggest appetite at that point. That seems to have been something that incorporated into my routine.
Absolutely. So you brought up a good point. If anybody has any questions or are looking for tips or just recipe inspiration, meal ideas, I'm going to pull up my contact information while I grab my apron, just so if anybody wants to note that, they can note that down really quickly.
Perfect.
So I'll just display that for a second here, and then I will be right back.
Very good. And I'll just repeat as Cynthia is getting ready, that the Alzheimer's Association is available to everyone here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We'll put that number in the chat again, but we do have our 800 number, which is 800-272-3900. And we're here to help with any questions that you have about Alzheimer's disease, any form of dementia, brain health. We do have lots of great resources around nutrition, healthy lifestyles as well. But we're here to help really provide education and support and guidance to families who are navigating this challenging experience. So if you are having a dilemma, or you're thinking about the holidays and what are the helpful ways to help your loved one enjoy the holiday season, this is what we're here for. And we would be delighted to talk about some simple tips and adjustments that you might want to consider making. So Cynthia, we don't have any questions coming in yet. We have a lovely, polite crowd who they're welcome to add those at any time, but whenever you're ready, we're happy to go for the demonstration.
All right, I will let you know. I'm just adjusting some angles here, and then we'll get going in just under a minute, I believe.
Oh, that's perfect. And one thing, as we are waiting for the demonstration to begin, regarding the holidays and dementia, you know, those can be challenging issues to deal with, as there is, you know, more activity, more people, just more stimulation. So sort of similar to what Cynthia was talking about, is rather than being overwhelmed, to focus on one thing at a time. And again, we're here at the Alzheimer's Association to help you build a plan around the holidays, but we do recommend that you think about simplifying. So if you are caring for somebody who has dementia, and they are coming to your home where you're going to have lots of folks, maybe a simple suggestion is to have an area in your home that you're mindful of where you can have your loved one just kind of step away from the commotion a little bit and just get a little bit of breath from all of the loving chaos that the holidays bring. And with that, you may want to designate somebody ahead of time to be mindful of that. So if there's a favorite niece or granddaughter or someone who might want to scoop her arm in your family members with dementia and just say, you know what, this is a little bit noisy. I'd love to visit with you. And just to take a few moments to help that person step away from sort of that noisy stimulation. That's one simple thing that you can do. But again, we're here to help with any plans that you may have.
All
And
right, I think
yep.
I'm ready to go. I'm sorry, Susan. I'm not sure if you're answering someone's question, but I'm just trying to adjust my angle here so you can see what I'm doing. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So are we good to go? Okay. So one of the dishes I wanted to feature today, it's a lightened up version of a popular holiday dish, green bean casserole. So I know that depending on the time, the occasion, maybe you have it more Thanksgiving, maybe you have it more Christmas, Hanukkah, what have you, but it is a common dish that you see this time of year. And I've created a version, a much lightened up recipe, but for me, it's like it has to be nutritious, but I don't want to sacrifice the flavor either. So we're still going to have that flavor. We're still going to have the texture that we're looking for in the green bean casserole. And you're going to see that I'm incorporating Mind Diet things, and I'm also incorporating some simple swaps, healthier cooking method, all the above. So we'll go through that step by step. So first things first, I am going to turn on my oven, and we don't need the dish to be in the oven too long because we're going to basically broil it for that final finishing touch. So I've got my oven, it's preheating, and when we think of that green bean casserole, the traditional one, I know everyone makes green beans in different ways, but when we're looking at that traditional version of the green bean casserole, it's usually the green beans, then it's that Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, and then it's those crispy onions. So yeah, we're incorporating the vegetables with the green beans, but then there's certain aspects of that dish we want to limit. Namely the soup, it can be pretty high in the saturated fat and the sodium. It can be pretty heavy because it has all that cream and all those flavorings in there. It is a process thing, you know, it's high in preservatives, and you know, it's one of those things that, like, if you're having it in that special occasion for the holiday, that's one thing. But if this is a dish that you like to feature a lot, or maybe you just want to lighten it up and see how your family or friends like it, so you can do something like this. And you know, besides the mushroom soup, the cream of mushroom soup, the other aspect of the dish is, you know, you mix the green beans with the cream of mushroom soup, and then you top it off with those crispy onions, and those are fried. And like I mentioned, we want to limit those fried foods as well. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to make a very similar dish, and you get that same feeling of that traditional green bean casserole, but with all these Mind Diet things incorporated in there as well. So for that cream of mushroom soup base, I'm going to make a base incorporating onions and mushrooms, and we're going to incorporate more low-fat dairy, and I'm going to show you that in a second. But let me show you what I've got started so far. So right here, I have some mushrooms and onions that I just got started right before I presented. So I am going to turn this back on because we're going to let this heat up a bit. And what you want to do with this is you've got, I got the baby Bella mushrooms, and then I've got a white onion that I've just sliced up really thinly. And then we're incorporating those heart healthy fats here. So we've got olive oil that I used to cook this in. So I put some olive oil in here. This is on medium heat, added the mushrooms and the onions. And I just kind of cook them to get that moisture out. So it's almost there. You can see there's a little bit of moisture here. So I've turned the heat back on, and we're gonna let that moisture cook out and then proceed with the next step to make that kind of creamy mushroom sauce. So while this is heating up, let me show you what other items I'm incorporating. And I think I'm gonna need to pop up a little bit more for that. So thank you for your patience as I get this perfect angle for you guys. All right, so here's our mushrooms going. They're sizzling away. I'm not sure if you can hear that sizzle, but we're just adding, again, cooking it down until that moisture is cooked away on medium heat. Got that oven preheating. And then the star of the dish, the green beans, I've got them in this ice water bath right here. So basically what I did was, and this is just like the typical green bean recipe where you put the green beans into boiling water, and then this was an ice bath. So I put them in boiling water for about 3 minutes, and then we put it into an ice bath, and I let it sit there so it cools down, and they've got that wonderful, vibrant green color. This is a great way to bring out that natural bright green color and not get them to kind of oxidize and turn that like light, not light, but that kind of dull green, which is just not as appetizing. And it can also lead to like kind of overcooked and the texture gets a little bit mushy. So these will be ready once we created that cream base here. And for this cream base, we've got the mushrooms and onions ready to go. They've heated up, and you can see that most of that moisture is cooked out. And you can always adjust this, you know, if you like more mushrooms or more onions, you can always adjust this to your taste. And what we're gonna do to create that kind of creamy mushroom base is we're gonna create like a roux, which is where you take flour and milk and create like a thick sauce. So to create that thick sauce, we're gonna use some flour. So I've got some, you can use whole wheat flour because we're wanting to go for whole grains, right? And then we're gonna add some milk. And then we're gonna add a little bit of Greek yogurt. So we are limiting those saturated fats, we're limiting that sodium, but we're still gonna get that really great final texture. So the mushrooms and onions are ready to go. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this flour and I'm gonna just sprinkle it into this mixture. This is about a tablespoon and a half of flour. You can always adjust based off, you know, when you're eyeballing it, but I don't think you need too much more than that. And the flour is gonna help to thicken up this mixture. If you don't have flour, you could do something like cornstarch as well. But this is what's gonna create that thick, creamy texture and still stay within some decent nutrition at the same time. So we're gonna let this flour mix in. We're gonna let it cook just for a minute or so until it starts to, you'll see it's starting to kind of dissolve into the onions and mushrooms. And it's gonna start to toast up a bit. So you'll notice it'll get a little bit brown. And that's when we'll be ready for the next step. And you know, I mentioned these Mind Diet foods that are really rich in certain nutrients and vitamins. Mushrooms are really rich in vitamin D, so they're a really great addition. And you know, our bodies naturally, we make vitamin D by getting that exposure to the sunlight, but you do get vitamin D in some fortified foods and things like that. And then of course it's in things like eggs, and you can find them in mushrooms too. You'll start to notice it's toasting when you get a nice aroma. So pay attention to that if you are recreating this dish at home. So I think this is ready for that next step. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this milk and we're going to add a little bit at a time. And if it's sizzling a lot, you feel like the milk is evaporating away. We don't want it to evaporate away. You can lower the heat a little bit. What's going to happen is the milk and the flour are going to react and they're going to create that thicker texture, that kind of thick gravy and sauce. So I'm adding a little bit at a time. And we're going to let this thicken up and add a little bit at a time until you've added the full. For this one, I need about a cup of the milk. So I'm not sure if you can see from there, but you can see like this is really thickening up because of that interaction with the flour, and that's that roux that we're creating. And this is going to add that really nice thick texture when we're mixing it with the green beans and everything. And this is, if you have it on like medium low heat, this is a pretty fast process, especially because mushrooms and onions have already been cooking. So it shouldn't take too much longer. All right, I'm gonna let this cook a little bit more. You can see maybe that with the addition of the, once that flour has toasted and that color from the onions and mushrooms, it's gonna create a nice, warm, toasted color in the mixture. So we're gonna let this thicken up a little bit more. For a minute or two. And then the last step we're gonna do is we're gonna add a bit of salt and pepper. And then we're also gonna add, we want some creaminess, right? But we don't wanna have that full fat. We don't wanna have too much sodium, all that. So I'm gonna add creaminess with some Greek yogurt. So we're gonna add some Greek yogurt into this. And it may seem counterintuitive because yogurt's usually enjoyed cold, but you can actually have it in warm dishes. You know, it can be warmed up too. I know I bake a lot with it. I've made oatmeal, like kind of oatmeal bars, or like a baked oatmeal and incorporated Greek yogurt. So it does go really well in warm dishes as well. So it's still thickening up. It's a really nice texture. I wish you guys could smell this. It smells amazing. So while that is going on, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get those green beans and take them out of that ice box. Just line this with some paper towels. This is the casserole dish I'm going to put this in later. So I like to do this so then you're not overusing dishes. You have less dishes to do. I'm just going to take the green beans out of this ice bath here and just let them sit because we don't want it to get too watery. And I'm making sure to stir this so it doesn't boil over. But also so it's thickening up like we want it to. And this is something you can prepare ahead of time. You can blanch the green beans ahead of time. You can make this mixture ahead of time and refrigerate it or freeze it. And then you can make that topping ahead of time as well. So these are all components, especially during the day of the holiday meal. You probably have a lot going on already. So it's nice to be able to simplify one of the dishes and just have, you know, quickly put these three aspects together and pop it in the oven. Save some time. Okay, so the sauce is really nice and thick. I'm going to turn the stove off. Give it one more stir. You can see they're really nice and creamy. We're gonna add some more creaminess with that yogurt, and the yogurt's gonna add, you know, we mentioned lean protein, so the yogurt's gonna also add some protein as well. So let me add this yogurt in. Give it a quick stir. And you're gonna see that it looks very similar to that cream of mushroom texture. And like I mentioned, you can let this cool down, put it in an airtight container, put it in the fridge, and then you just mix it, it's ready to go. Doesn't that look like that cream of mushroom soup? All right, so I just gotta add some salt and pepper here for taste. Pepper. And this is good too, when we're trying to limit our sodium, it's good that we, when we're cooking or making this from scratch, because we can really pay attention to how much salt is really going into what we're eating. And most of the sodium we get traditionally in like the American diet, it's not necessarily coming from the foods that we're cooking. It's coming from those processed foods. All right, so this mixture is ready and it's ready for the green beans. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna slowly incorporate these green beans and mix it up really nicely.
Hey, Sid, this is Susan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
A question did come in about the milk. Can you substitute the milk for a nut milk, such as an almond milk?
Yeah, I think you could. You could easily do like almond milk, soy milk, oat milk would probably work well as well. I think something you'd have to be mindful of is you might have to just adjust the flour to make sure you're getting that thickness and consistency that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see why not. You could easily do a plant-based or dairy-free option. That's a great question.
Thank you. That was great. And I have to say, as I'm hungry as I'm watching this, but I really, what stands out to me is just with this, you know, these simple substitutes that you're using, just cutting down on the sodium that comes in. The sodium is so high in soup, isn't it generally? And this seems like such a better option.
Oh yes, you are completely right. You're very hard pressed to find a soup in the soup aisle that is within those like recommendations for sodium, or you know, that very low sodium.
Yeah.
So this is a great option. And yeah, the soup is going to naturally be like really high in saturated fat and sodium. There's one brand of soups. It's in the frozen aisle, and it's called Tabachnik. And they actually have some really great very low sodium options, and they're still very tasty. So they have different soups. That's the only one, honestly, that I really see that is not super loaded in that sodium. Because you think soup, veggies, lean protein, sometimes when it has the meat, but the sodium is where it gets us.
Well, and so many of the other dishes that we serve on the holidays are also so high in saturated fat and sodium. So if you can't reduce it in everything, just to, you know, have a favorite dish like this where you can reduce that, it's helping. I think that's great.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where it still tastes like that final product, that final dish that your family is going to enjoy. So I mixed up the green beans into this mixture. You can see we got that kind of creamy base, and I'm transferring it to the cooking dish. And once I do that, I'm going to prepare a topping. So the topping is really simple. We're used to those crispy onions. We want that texture, right? And I mentioned before that we can get that texture by, instead of doing the crispy onions, do something like nuts. So that's what I'm going to do. I've got some crushed walnuts that I'm going to mix up. I've got, we also want to add some flavor. So I've got some dried parsley and then we mentioned whole grains. We still want to add some crunch factor. We can add whole grains. I've got some whole wheat breadcrumbs that we're going to mix up really nicely, and it's going to create that delicious crunchy texture. So we'll put this aside, and then I'll show you how to make that topping. So for the topping, I have got some whole wheat panko breadcrumbs. I like the panko. You could use any breadcrumbs, a whole wheat, a whole grain one, but I like the panko because they're kind of larger and they're going to create this really great texture. And then to that, I'm going to add some dried parsley for flavor. Then I'm going to add these crushed walnuts. You could use any, I think pecans would go great. You could really use any kind of nut. But that crushed walnut is going to really add that wonderful texture. So that's all pretty much we need for that topping. And then I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil. Again, that heart healthy fat, and we're getting the healthy fats from the walnuts too. And this is just going to help everything bind together in the topping. Just a teaspoon or two. We're going to mix that up really well. And it's not necessary to make it super sticky, but we just want that oil to help things stick together. Because once we're putting it in the oven and it browns up really nicely, it's going to help to get that crisped up texture we want. So that's it, super simple. If you want, you can maybe add a pinch of salt and pepper to this. Just add a pinch. And then it's ready to be topped. Add to our casserole dish. You can use the spoon, you can use your hands. Why not use your hands? It's fun. We're just going to cover the whole top of this with that crunchy mixture. You can see a little goes a long way. We only used a few tablespoons of everything to create that crispy, crunchy texture. And that's it. We mentioned that the green beans, the filling or the mixture, and then that crunchy topping. And now this is ready to go in the oven. So I'm going to pop it into the oven. You can put it on your broil setting or just like a really high temperature. And once you start to notice it gets like a darker golden brown, then it's ready to take out and to serve. So I'll put this in the oven, and then we'll see if we have any last minute questions or any other questions or feedback from our group.
Well, that looked amazing, and I'm 100% hungry now. Thank you.
We chose a time where it's like right around dinner time. Everyone's going to be smart, wanting to have a sample of this.
One other question I saw is there a I'm just trying to find the question again. Is there a nutritional advantage to extra virgin olive oil versus olive oil? Is there any value of one over the other in terms of brain health or just
sure? That's actually a really great question. I do get that question quite a bit. It's not necessarily in terms of brain health, but it speaks more to the quality of the product. So if you really want the most nutrients and the most out of that olive oil, you want to go for the extra virgin olive oil, just because the extra virgin is like that first press out of the olives. Mm-hmm. And then the second press is virgin. And then the remaining press is like the pure olive oil. I know in Italy, they use that pure olive oil mainly for frying and things like that. And that very special, those rare occasions when there is frying, just because it's a more refined oil and things like that. But I would recommend extra virgin just because you're getting that first press and all those, the most, nutrients. So I mean, I love that question. And then, there's other oils too that are heart healthy, like avocado oil, peanut oil, and brain healthy, of course, and incorporates all those healthy fats that we've been speaking to. I do like olive oil more for, like, you could use it for baking. You can use it for like maybe if you're making a fresh, like a salad or a marinade or dressing. But for the super high heat, and we didn't do too high heat cooking today, so I incorporated the olive oil. But if you're having a really high heat cooking, maybe you're doing a stir fry, anything like that, I would recommend an avocado oil or a peanut oil, just because it has a higher smoke point, something called a smoke point, which is basically the temperature at which the oil breaks down and you start to lose the beneficial properties. So for the high heat cooking, the avocado oil and those other oils, they have a very high smoke point, like 400 degrees, 450, whereas olive oil is lower than that. So if you're using it for high heat cooking, it may break down some of those beneficial things, and something to keep in mind. Yeah. But they're all great options. Just keep that in mind as you're preparing your dishes, what you're using them for. Olive oil you can also use in baking and things like that too. It's perfectly fine.
That's great. That's great. Another question was, there is a family debate over the traditional Christmas dinner of turkey versus ham. And is there one that you would recommend from a health standpoint, one over the other?
Yeah, so I know that's a big debate in most families. Some people prefer the turkey, some people prefer the ham. From a nutritional standpoint, I would recommend the turkey. It's not as processed, especially if you're making the turkey at home. I mentioned when you're making something, you can control the sodium and the flavor you're putting into it. Ham usually is coming with, like, it's prepared and we're heating it up and things like that in a lot of situations, right? And then if we're looking at comparing the two, turkey is a lean protein and it's poultry. So that's also included in that Mind diet recommendation. One recommendation I would say is maybe if you're having turkey regularly, have it without the skin, especially if you're looking at incorporating the Mind diet in your daily routine and your eating habits. But if you're just having the skin in your one holiday meal, I mean, I say enjoy and move on. But you just want to be mindful of that. But I would choose the turkey from a nutrition standpoint.
Okay. Well, and that makes me think of another question actually for myself. In the news recently, there was information about high processed foods, highly processed, and that unfortunately those can be detrimental for your health. I think, cardiac health, and we know cardiac health is very closely related to brain health. Can you help us to understand what a highly processed food is, so that we can make better choices? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that they added that keyword highly processed or ultra processed food because it's speaking to those foods that have been really, they add a lot of products, they add a lot of maybe additives, sweeteners, salt, like a saturated fat, where it's creating that final product that is going to be appetizing, of course, and then it's going to sell well. It's going to, it's not going to stay on the shelf for long. So those are those foods that are just loaded with all those things. But I think that it gets confusing because, something like a vegetable can be processed, and the word processing, it can mean different things. So if a vegetable is processed, it just means that the bagged lettuce was washed before, the lettuce was harvested, it was washed before it was bagged and sold in the store. So that's an example of processing with a healthy ingredient. I have an example for today, actually. This is processed technically. So this is the bag of green beans I use. Sure. And this is how I've saved some time today. So a lot of those times when we're preparing the green beans, we have to wash them and snip them and things like that. And these came washed, snipped, and ready to use in the recipe. So this is an example of how this is processed where it can be ready to use, but should not be confused with something like ultra processed or highly processed. You know, that those really high sodium soups, the frozen meals, those things that we know that are loaded with those saturated fats and sodium and added sugars that we want to be avoiding, that's what I would consider more a ultra processed or highly processed food.
Excellent. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I see just two last questions. One is talking about butter versus margarine. Is there one that's preferable over the other? And is there a particular brand that you determine to be a healthier choice?
I think with either, if you're going to incorporate it, then just watch the portion. You know, if you like to have butter on your toast every morning, and that's just like 1 teaspoon or 2 teaspoons, in the grand scheme of your day, that's not making or breaking it because you're still limiting it. You're having a small portion. So with either one, you just want to be mindful. I prefer butter if I'm going to choose, especially in terms of it's just more versatile. There are some great products out there though that I recommend for somebody who's trying to follow a more heart healthy, brain healthy diet. If you do want to incorporate, you know, more regularly or incorporate. So there's like the Smart Balance spreads, and those are usually very low sodium, much lower in saturated fat than butter. And they incorporate, there's some that incorporate those omega-3s that they are supplemented or included in the sense of maybe they have like a walnut oil or a fish oil that is providing the omega-3s to that spread. And I really like using the Smart Balance myself. I have just noticed that at room temperature, it gets softer really quickly. So it's something to keep in mind, especially if you're trying to use it for a recipe where you need the butter to be cold, or you're, you know, maybe baking with it or something like that. But yeah, I think if you're having butter, small portion, that's fine. But if you want to try, there are some other options. Like I mentioned, you know, it's not that I want anybody to completely stop eating certain foods, but we want to limit them and then find ways to incorporate more nutrition in what we're eating. And that, you know, that Smart Balance is an example of, it's limiting the saturated fat, but it's incorporating some of them are incorporating some other aspects.
Great. Thank you. Oh, I think we stalled for a minute. Thank you. And then the last question we have is your presentation was wonderful. We're getting lots of great positive comments about that. Are we able to share the presentation handouts because the content that you provided was so helpful?
Yeah, I can send over a PDF of the slides and or a copy of the slides, and maybe Stacy can kind of facilitate sending that out to the registrants.
That sounds perfect.
I don't see a problem with that.
Excellent. Well, Siddhi, thank you so much. And again, the information that you provided, and for my perspective, was just, no pun intended, but digestible. I appreciate that. Kind of proud of that, actually, but I appreciate the fact that you made it very understandable. And those adjustments, it sounds like it's not about throwing away everything that you've done before, but what are the adjustments that you can make, and all of these things that you're talking about. There is increasing evidence about the nutritional value of just mindful eating, and that these adjustments can help us with cardiovascular health, which is a risk factor for brain health issues. So and the good news is we know the general public knows so much about heart health. So if you lean toward a heart healthy lifestyle, there is increasing evidence that may indeed benefit brain health as well.
Brain health as well, absolutely. And it's one of those things that, like, the smallest change can make the biggest difference. So don't feel disheartened, and just start somewhere,
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's here tonight. Special thank you to Stacy Chavis and Kristen Welton, who were our behind the scenes heroes, making sure that we got this program off the ground. So we will be sending out the recording to tonight's session for everyone who registered and attended. And thank you, Sithi. We'll be sharing your PowerPoint presentation as well. And this is perfect timing as we see, oh my God, that looks incredible. That wonderful crunchy topping. It looks wonderful coming out of the oven.
So it really only took a few minutes, and it's like a very nice, I know some people like that charred texture.
Yeah.
So if you have, this is going to be like a crowd pleaser. If somebody wants that charred texture, they can go there. Somebody wants that golden brown, they can go over here. But it looks just like that traditional green bean casserole, does it not?
That looks phenomenal. Excellent. Well, even I can do that. So thank you for choosing one that's not too complicated. That was great.
Oh yeah. No, I'm a fan of keeping it simple for sure.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much again. And again, thank you everybody for joining us. And the Alzheimer's Association is available to you 24 hours a day at alz.org, or you can call our helpline at 800-272-3900. We do answer that phone 24 hours a day with no exception. It is not an answering service. It's us. So if we can be of any support to you, we're eager to help. So thank you, everybody. We hope you have a great night and try out the green bean casserole for your holiday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Have a great evening.